I don't know why it doesn't do like the full screen, but okay. Anyway, so a couple weeks ago, we watched this coyote and badger for the video, the full video. I just had a GIF last time, but we watched this coyote and badger cross the tunnel together. This clip comes from Peninsula Open Trust, and was taken in Gilroy, California, which is, if you didn't know, the garlic capital of the world. Not the point of talk today, but it went viral in 2020, and it inspired. Oh, this is the video again. We can watch it again because it's very cute. But anyway, it inspired lots of fun fan art, all kinds of good stuff going around on Twitter. But the pair was captivating to many, and a lot of people wanted to know more about why they pair up, how common this is, including us. I showed this clip last week when we talked about wildlife crossings, or a few weeks ago, and some of you wanted to know more about interspecies relationships. And so when we're talking about friendships, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. I'm not really talking about these cute animal friends that you often see on social media. While they're extra cute, they're usually just like one-offs, but I want to talk more about the phenomenon of odd animal pairings that occur in nature. But one really interesting side note is zookeepers tend to pair cheetahs with dogs. Cheetahs are quite nervous animals, so to put them at ease in a zoo setting, they pair them with dogs at a really young age, and the dogs act as like their surrogate sibling. And so they end up being best friends, and it gives the cheetah a bit of a sense of security. So that's extra cute, kind of along the same lines, but not necessarily something you would find in nature, but tends to work out really well. But in nature, when two organisms live in close association, it's known as a symbiotic relationship, or symbiosis. Symbioses can come in many different forms, from something that's mutually beneficial to something that's mutually harmful. And so what I'm going to go through today is these different types of symbiotic relationships. It can really be broken down into these four categories: competition, predation, commensalism, and mutualism. We'll save mutualism for the end, since that's probably what you're all here for. But getting into competition, competition is an interaction between individuals, usually along the same level in the trophic pyramid, where they're competing for resources. It's an interaction that is mutually harmful. It requires them to compete for a resource that is in limited supply. And it's mutually harmful for them because of several different reasons. One, it takes energy to acquire and defend a resource. Additionally, the presence of one competitor always is going to reduce the amount available of the resource to the other competitor. In the face of competition, competitors that occupy the exact same niche cannot coexist. In other words, when the roles an organism plays in a community, two organisms play in a community are exactly the same, one is always going to lose out. One competitor is often stronger than the other, leading to the extirpation of its counterpart. Like in this situation, this is a classic example that is often taught in ecology courses, where alone this one type of barnacle that's shown in brown can exist all the way up from low tide to high tide, but when it's competing, it can only occupy a much smaller amount of its niche because of the of its competitor that is better at competing for the space. Eventually, intense competition can lead to resource partitioning. In this scenario, species become more specialized in their habitat and resource use in order to avoid competition. And a great example of this comes from this classic ecological paper on warblers, where it was observed that different species of warbler occupy different foraging heights in trees in order to avoid this competition with each other. So now getting into predation, I'm sure we're all familiar with predation. Predation is a beneficial interaction on one counterpart, negative to the other. One species is causing harm to the other. One benefits, one is harmed. And predation can come in a few different forms. So I've talked about parasitism a little bit in the past. Parasitism is a form of predation. In this case, the organism is living in or on the other being the host, causing harm. It doesn't always result in death to the host. Similarly with micropredators like mosquitoes, this organism feeds entirely on the other, but it doesn't kill. So like mosquitoes will take blood meals. It's not ultimately going to kill the prey item, but it is a form of predation. And then our classic predator, where one organism is consuming the other. Predation regulates populations, predation and parasitism. So you'll see without predators, prey populations can really take off. Whereas when you have a prey and a predator relationship, you get these predator-prey cycles where they're keeping each other in check. And the third type of relationship is commensalism. Commensalism, it may or may not be something you've heard of before. This is an interaction between species in which one species benefits and the other derives nothing, neither benefit nor harm. They're completely unaffected. This particular example that I have here, golden jackals tend to follow tigers around in nature. It doesn't really bother the tiger or affect them in any way, but the jackal finds food that way. And a really great example of commensalism are epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants that grow on the surface of another, but derive their nutrients from the air, rain, or debris that accumulate around the plant. Examples of this, like the one I've shown here, is an air plant, but orchids also fall into this category, and some types of fern. Another commensalism is this carmine bee eater. There is a really great clip from the Grasslands episode of Planet Earth 2. I was not able to find that on YouTube, but highly recommend going to watch that. But essentially, these bee eaters will tag along with larger animals, either perching on them or flying near them, because as animals walk through the grassland, they'll scare up insects. And that makes it a lot easier for them to just swoop in and get an easy meal. They're not really doing anything for this larger animal, in this case, like an African buffalo. But they get a nice, easy meal out of it. Another fun example, something we've talked about in the past as well, with commensalistic relationships, are synanthropes. Synanthropes are animals that share a commensalistic relationship with humans. So a lot of our urban animals are synanthropes, so like raccoons in this example. There's really, you can maybe argue that there might be some harm to humans, but all in all, their relationship, humans aren't really affected by what raccoons are doing. Raccoons just want your garbage or fruit from your trees or cat food that you leave out, and they're getting a meal from that, and they're really benefiting from this close association with humans. humans aren't really affected. And finally, what you have all come here today for is mutualism, our animal friends. Mutualisms are interactions between species in which both species benefit. These can come in many different forms, and partnerships form for a variety of different reasons, and we'll go through a couple of them. So the first is hunting. Species will pair up to hunt together. Sometimes they share a meal, sometimes it's just more beneficial for them to be in this partnership. So back to our coyote and badger, they hunt together. This is the type of relationship where they don't really share a meal, but they're much more successful in capturing prey items when they work together. The coyote is much better on land, the badger is much better underground. So the badger can force prey up to the surface, coyote can get it there. On the other side, coyote can chase prey into their burrows, where the badger can get it. Similarly, moray eels and groupers are also hunting buddies. The grouper is large and more skilled at navigating open waters, where the eel is slender and better at getting into the cracks and crevices. So again, they're not going to share a meal, but they're much more successful when they work together. And this is a really interesting interaction. The grouper will actually come up to the moray eel. It will do that little head shake to initiate the hunt. The moray eel will either accept or decline, and then they'll be off. And then they'll chase their meal around. They're usually fairly successful. And then a really interesting mutualistic interaction where two species are hunting together is wolves and ravens. Wolves will make a kill, but ravens will harvest most of the carcass. And it's been observed that the ravens are often present when the wolf makes a kill. It's not a wolf pack will make a kill and then scavengers will show up. They're already there. It's not really known why they form these bonds or what benefit there is to wolves, but it has been observed, particularly in the Yellowstone ecosystem, that ravens will interact with younger wolves and play with them. They'll play tug of war and like fetch with them essentially. But they'll also form really special bonds with individuals within a pack. And the wolves seem to like having them around, but what the benefit is in this companionship isn't well understood. And so another form of mutualism arises in the form of both species performing and receiving service. And so a common example that a lot of people are familiar with is clownfish and anemones. Without the clownfish, the anemone, while it is venomous, it is vulnerable to predation by butterfly fish. The clownfish will chase away these butterfly fish and in turn provide protection and also droppings in form of poop, which fertilizes the anemone. But the anemone also provides protection for the clownfish. If you've seen Finding Nemo, I'm sure you're very familiar with this. The clownfish will brush up against the anemone to desensitize itself to its stingers and then make its home inside the anemone, and then that provides it protection from larger predators. Another fun ocean example are gobies and pistol shrimp. They work together to build a home. They live together in this home. but they're providing different things. They're bringing different things to this household. The shrimp is really good at digging, but it has terrible eyesight. Where on the other hand, the goby has excellent eyesight. You can see it has these really large eyeballs. But because it's a fish, it's not really good at digging. So the goby kind of acts as the shrimp's eyes, or like its seeing eye companion. The shrimp will put one of its antennae on the goby, and the goby will guide it along the ocean floor. So it knows where it's going, where to dig, and then it will alert it if there is danger near, and they both can retreat back to their little burrow. A really fun example that I had never heard of before is this relationship between burrowing tarantulas and tiny frogs. There isn't really like a specific type of tarantula or type of frog that participate in this relationship. It's been observed in several different places throughout the world, but it's really interesting because these tiny frogs are kind of almost like little pets to the tarantulas. The tarantulas provide protection. As you can see, they'll hide underneath the tarantula, and it will provide protection against predators. But then the frog, you can barely see it, will hang out in the burrow and protect the tarantula's eggs. The tarantula's eggs are really vulnerable to predation from ants. So it'll just hang out there and eat the ants. So it's providing a service, but it's also getting a meal. But that was a really cool example. And then finally, we have mutualisms that provide service to one partner and food to the other. A classic example of this is wrasse. Wrasse are fishes that will pick parasites off of other fish. They don't really have a specific fish partner that they like. They'll service pretty much anyone that comes by, but it rids the bigger fish of these parasites, and it provides the wrasse a little meal. And then one of my favorite examples, one that I used to share with my students, my undergrads, when I was teaching about mutualisms, is this mistletoe bird. But I'll let David Attenborough tell you a little bit more about them.
This is a mistletoe. It can only exist in partnership with a tree, for it has no roots of its own. But this is a very one-sided relationship. The mistletoe has green leaves, so it can manufacture food, but it draws all the liquid it needs from the tree onto which it's fastened itself. The tree gets nothing from the arrangement. The mistletoe, in short, is a parasite. The mistletoe family has over 1,000 species. Here in Australia alone, there are 75, so many and so widely dispersed that somewhere or another there is always one in fruit. And that makes it possible for one bird to eat almost nothing else. The mistletoe bird knows exactly how to extract the fruit. The bird digests the fleshy coating of the seed with extraordinary speed. It takes less than half an hour to travel from beak to bottom. The seed, when it emerges, is still phenomenally sticky and has to be wiped off, which suits the mistletoe very well. The seed, when it comes out, remains attached to the bird's behind by a long sticky thread, and the bird has to have a special technique for breaking it. Every time time it needs to detach a seed, it has to perform this little dance. It's this stickiness that is the key to the mistletoe's success in getting from one tree to another. Once parked on a living branch, the seed quickly plugs itself in. With a connection to its host's liquid supply, it can build leaves and start making food for itself.
So that's a really interesting interaction between a parasitic organism, so a completely different type of symbiosis, and this bird. So we have this mutualistic interaction that's mutually beneficial. The bird gets a meal, the mistletoe gets transported to another branch, another tree, where it can parasitize that new tree. In the long term, these close beneficial relationships can lead to coevolution, or essentially developing different adaptations. Species can develop these mutually beneficial traits that really match well to their mutual partner. So like this bird, this flower, this bird has developed a really curved beak to match the shape of the flower that it gets nectar from. This coevolution can lead to obligate mutualisms. A lot of these mutualisms that I've talked about previously are known as facultative mutualisms, where you don't really need this partnership. It's really beneficial to both pairs or both partners if they participate, but it's not necessary to their survival. Like the coyote and badger, you'll often see coyotes. I wouldn't say you often see badgers, but you'll see them alone. You don't always see them as a pair. Whereas with obligate mutualisms, the species need the partnership to survive. So this example I have here is yucca, otherwise known as this particular example is a Joshua tree, and the yucca moth. They have evolved over millions of years to rely solely on each other. The moth is the only species that's capable of pollinating the yucca, but the larvae of the moth are entirely dependent on the seeds of the yucca as its only food source. So without one, it's kind of disastrous. Obligate mutualisms like that are very rare in nature because they're so extremely interdependent on one another. When you lose one, you're inevitably going to lose the other. So from an evolutionary standpoint, it's not super beneficial to be so reliant on one very specific organism in order to survive. Sometimes being really specialized like that really pays off, especially when you're fairly specialized to the point that you can rely on several different food sources, like this hummingbird here.
In Ecuador, the competition is at its most intense. Here there are 100 species of hummingbirds alone, all fighting for nectar. Each flower only has a small amount at any one time, and so it's first come, first served. One hummingbird has gone to great lengths to avoid conflict with other species. Swordbills are the only bird with a beak longer than their body. And some flowers are too elongated for the other 99 species of hummingbirds here to feed from them. A swordbill's extraordinary beak, however, enables it to reach the places that others can't. The top of this flower, where the sweet nectar is produced. It has found a solution that means it doesn't have to join the fight. And as each long flower blooms, it gives the swordbill a fresh supply of food all to itself. But having a beak longer than your body does have its drawbacks. For a start, it's tricky to keep it clean. Harder still, how do you preen your body feathers? Unlike the other hummers, swordbills can't reach their feathers with their beak. The only option, a good old scratch. It's a little unrefined, but a small price to pay for an exclusive food supply.
So the swordbill has evolved alongside of these flowers that produce these very long, or these plants that produce very long flowers. And it's kind of gotten to an extreme point where its beak is now so long that it's very difficult to keep it clean. It can't really preen itself, but it's mutually beneficial to both the plant and the hummingbird, because the hummingbird doesn't have to compete with all these others, and the plant gets pollinated. So that's all I have. No, that's played again. That's all I have for animal friendships today. So hopefully that satisfied your craving for something cute and odd. But yeah, thank you for joining us today, and we'll stop sharing.